The sexual abuse that was going on in my childhood was when I was 8 years old. It went on for 2 years. I never told anybody what was going on. I look back at myself at that age now, and I didn't really identify anything was alarming or wrong. I knew that it needed to be kept a secret and that it was something that only me and him done, and we didn't do it with anyone else, and we weren't to tell anyone else about it. Now, this man, he was 35 years old. My parents had recently separated, so he was a mate of my dad's. He was a friend of my dad's, work colleague, actually. My dad was a doctor, he was a nurse, and he needed help with accommodation, so he would stay around now and again. And this is when it all started.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Mashvitz. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Here's my first and most important question I'll ask you, and that is, how are you doing, Jeremy? Like, actually, really, how are you doing?
It's constant challenges doing this work, so it's full of ups and downs. But after great things that happened last week at Tottenham Hotspur's football club, we are enjoying this ride right now.
Yeah. I have a similar feeling as you. In a similar domain, I'm in like the mental health space. I had a personal story with suicide, and I was a professional wrestler. And so I've been trying to get mental health resources in the professional wrestling space. And I feel like some of the struggles you've been having as basically sort of getting a buy-in, like, has been very hard. Even though the information you're providing and what I think I'm providing is valuable. So I understand your struggle, but I think that the fight has to be pressed on. For me, and I know definitely 100% for you, we're intrinsically motivated. So no matter how many no's we get, it's like, fuck it. Like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I'm going to keep moving forward. So I say all that to say, like, appreciate that. And the stuff you're doing obviously is very, very, very important. And I'm sure you felt that as you've received some of these stories on your website and your organization, Something to Say, which is a great name. You know, this is something for everybody. So well done there.
Yeah, I saw we had something similar there. So on the same track, yeah.
But I know we'll touch on your story like a little bit. But what's been the sort of the struggle? How have you been getting into schools and stuff? And what is actually the work that you're actually trying to do there?
So I'm continually knocking on people's doors to let me in to come and speak. And I'm talking about child sexual abuse and trying my best to raise awareness and get this subject on everybody's table. But the problem with it is it's so taboo and it's so sensitive and it's so uncomfortable for people that they don't want to deal with it at all. Now, schools are brilliantly teaching about abuse prevention and consent and body awareness in schools. It's a mandatory requirement in this country. But to bring a speaker in who's going to tell their real lived story is almost it's unmapped territory for them. So they'd rather just stick with the general curriculum and not bring in a speaker to speak about this. So schools is predominantly what I'm trying to get into because that's how I get in front of these young people. And I receive, for every yes I receive 100 no's. So I'm continually trying to break down these doors. But when I get bookings from big organisations like the football team, I spoke last year at the British Army, I spoke at the NHS, which is our health service. When I get bookings like that, it's really helping me almost develop my portfolio or CV, which seems to be what schools need to bring me in to speak about this very important topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's like your social proof. Like if local high school is like, oh, why should we bring in Jeremy? Well, he just spoke with a bunch of like world-class football players. So like, I think you should. But why are schools hesitant to bring you in? Like, is it something that they don't have control over? They don't know how their students are going to react? Like, what is it maybe?
So I'm continually actually trying to problem solve what it is that schools aren't so happy to bring me in on. Because if you think about it like this, if you want to teach your children about drugs and addiction, the best person to do that for your students is somebody that's been addicted to drugs and has recovered and wants to come in and tell their true story. Like, we all agree with that. If you want to teach your students about gangs, county lines, knife crime, you want to bring in somebody that has been stabbed or stabbed somebody, done prison time for it, been involved in gangs, and is now reformed and wants to come and speak to these students about it. So why is sexual abuse any different? If you want to educate young people about sexual abuse prevention, what to do if you're in a sexual abuse situation, surely the best person to do that is somebody that's had real lived experience of it and wants to come and talk to those students about it. Because the traditional classroom environment, the traditional classroom techniques, they don't reach all the children. Young people are often bored in those classrooms, but real life stories is something that captures them. So you would have thought after that explanation from me that all schools would be like, emailing me constantly, when can you come in? But it's just not like that. I'm just not getting that response. Now, I'm under no illusion that one of the reasons may be because I'm not of quality to bring into their school yet. Maybe, my work is not of quality to do that, but I don't believe that's actually the reason. Because every time I go and speak anywhere, the response I get is phenomenal and everybody starts recommending me off the back of that. So one of the feedback that I recently got was a head teacher came to me and said, I've been a head teacher for 15 years and I have sat through countless safeguarding trainings and I've never learned as much as I have off the back of yours. So that's got to be proof that my work is of quality to bring me in. But I think there is more complications than we can imagine. I think one of the first ones is they can't deal with any backlash from any parents for bringing me in and speaking to their kids about sexual abuse, because there's always going to be one parent that there may be always one parent that complains about it. I don't want that in front of my child. That's not what I send them to school for. So that could be one reason. Another reason could be that there's been some concern from another teacher within the organization, because I'm quite outspoken about a number of topics like pornography, offending, what we're going to do with offenders, how to reach offenders before they commit the crime. And some members of staff may not like that. And they also may be like, we can only bring in speakers that are squeaky clean. Anyone that's a little bit pushing the boundaries online, we can't bring them in. And another reason what I think could be a concern for schools is they're worried about how many disclosures they may get following me coming in and speaking, and they may not have the system in place to deal with that.
Yeah, that last one, it may bring to light a lot of stuff. That's very true. Yeah, because I think about... Oh, go ahead.
But the answer to that, the solution to that, is not to not bring me in. That doesn't serve any logic.
Right. It further proves the point that you need to address it, and then also address the services that might be available to kids that are feeling that way.
Right.
Because, now, if, God forbid, if something happens to someone, they maybe have a thought in the back of their mind like, oh, my school did this thing. Now it's hard for a child to realize all of that things, but you never know. If the resource is never there, then they're definitely not going to say anything. If it's there and they saw a grown man who they're like, oh, that could potentially be me when I grow up, I could speak at schools and talk. Well, he spoke out, maybe like, fucking I will. Like, and it's the same thing in the mental health space. Like, how do you talk about suicide prevention? You bring in someone who is specifically dealt with suicide. I lost my big sister. That's what I talk about when I go to schools.
Right.
Both subjects are very dark, and that's really not the point of the story sharing. The story sharing is to shed the light on what could happen post that event. Like, how can your life be better? What are the resources? What are the preventative measures? How can we be more proactive? Like, yes, the story itself has darkness. There's death, there's abuse. But what's the next step? What's the light? How do we move forward with that? And that's the beauty of story sharing. And I mean, I think that's the cornerstone of why you started Something to Say. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. The organization was there because I got so much confidence through sharing my story, and I saw how much inspiration it gave other people. I wanted to give a space for others to share their story too. So I launched this platform called Something to Say, We started receiving stories from all over the world. We've recently just launched a YouTube channel too for people to share via video format, so people can actually like watch somebody share their story. And I truly believe that's going to grow into something phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very cool. When was the first time that you shared your story?
So I shared my story when I was, for the first time out loud, when I was 27 years old. I'm now 38 years old, so 11 years ago. And that was a journey in itself. You know, I was thought about sharing for about 2 years before I actually shared. And that just shows how challenging it is to actually speak a story like this out loud. And I was a grown man, you know, so when we think about these children and teenagers, they definitely would need some inspiration from seeing other people's stories to speak out about something that they've been through, something that they're going through right now, and to equip them for something that they may face in the future. So the first time I ever spoke out about it, sexual abuse in my childhood, I just got this incredible confidence after doing that, which surprised me. I didn't think that would be the reaction. I just felt like this weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And so for the years coming after that, I spoke more and more to another friend, to another friend, to another friend. And over that 5 years, I just built this confidence, which I didn't really know where I was going with this. But looking back at it now, I was just shedding this fear of being scared or embarrassed to talk about it. Until then, I took it online and on open mic nights in London, and that's when I took my story public.
Wow. And before you shared your story publicly, and those 2 years before that, you knew that what had happened to you was wrong, or was there some disassociation with that, or how were you dealing with those feelings?
For decades after the abuse finished when I was 10 years old, I just buried it. And, you know, on a surface level, didn't even think about it, worry about it. It wasn't a thing in my life. It wasn't a thing that I thought about. Then as I got into my mid-teens and then my late teens, there'd be little triggers here and there, maybe a film, maybe something someone said, maybe something on the news that would trigger what had happened. But I honestly, at that time, just didn't care about it. And it was never anything that I was going to face as a young man, you know. I just didn't want to deal with that. So just kept it buried until I got into my mid-20s and it just surfaced. And I realized that I needed to do something about it. So there's this long journey, you know, and I'm quite sure that people come to my work online and they see me being so outspoken about it all, and I often try to remind everybody this didn't happen like overnight. Yeah, this has been a long process of struggles and obstacles and facing fears and shedding fears and facing fears and to get to this point. And I feel like it just can really, you know what? Even if people come to my page or I speak at someone's school and they've never been through an experience of sexual abuse in their childhood, in their adulthood, I would love my story just to show those, in particular, those children and young teenagers, that it doesn't matter what you go through in life, that you can still lead a successful life with good friendships and successful career, and let people know that you can always overcome whatever hand is dealt to you in your childhood.
Yeah, 100%. That's why story sharing is so powerful. I mean, I'm sure you felt that now starting a podcast, like
Mm.
from all walks of life, different people, different feelings, like everyone has gone through different experiences, but the resulting emotion is still the same. You and I, same emotion. It's like
Yes.
hope. It's like hope for people. Hope that you can come out of the darkness. There's strength and courage in all this. I know those two words mean a lot to you. I was listening to a previous episode you did. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, strength and courage. And if we can draw that out of a young person at an early age, then when they potentially go through their first heartbreak or get rejected
Mm.
from their first job, yes, the level of extremity of those things is not the same as child abuse. Yes, that doesn't really matter though, right? They still have to be able to pull themselves up and say, okay, yes, I did get rejected from my first 10 jobs coming out of university. Shit, what do I do? Okay,
Right.
Jeremy taught me strength and courage. I remember that. I can draw that out of myself. Okay, 10 more, 10 more. Okay, finally got the job, 30 interviews in. Here we go. Now we've got some momentum. And that stuff is like the real life application of it. If you're thinking about, if you're a teacher listening to this, you're like, well, there's like 100 students and like maybe 4 of them will dealt with sexual abuse, right? Well, the other 96 are still going to deal with life, which is very hard and sometimes, really challenging. And those obstacles, how we view them, are going to make us stronger or bring us back down. And so those points are quite important, at least in my eyes, when I'm thinking about kids.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I don't think there's enough of that. Especially in what I've observed in the 5 years I've been doing this work with a lot of the survivor communities. One thing that really inspired me to do this work and go all in with it is I only really saw sadness and sorrow. I only really saw the conversation around how bad this is. How are we ever going to get past this? And I then started to think, well, if I was a teenager wanting to research online about other people talking about this and I only saw sadness and sorrow, then, naturally I'm probably going to lean towards that. But if we can throw in the mixer with a little bit of hope, like you say, I think hope's a great word, inspiration, determination, strength and courage, then we're doing some good for the younger generations that are looking to us to set an example. They're looking to us to set an example of what can lead them down a good path. And we're all hooked into narrative. That's why we watch films. That's why we love TV series. Like, we're hooked as a human being. We are hooked into story. And that's why during my presentation, which I adapt for the different ages, and of course, if I'm doing it to staff and teachers or any other adults, I adapt it. I don't take the story element out of it. That's the one thing that stays as a standard through whoever I'm presenting to. Even if I'm presenting at a conference to professionals, I keep the story element in it. Because one of the things that I see with the sexual abuse situation, in particular in people's childhood, is we're never really explaining what it really is. Like, we'll talk about the grooming process as a process, but we'll never really talk about how a 5-year-old could get groomed into doing something sexual with an adult. It's like that. I feel like I want to hit people with the reality of it, so that they go home and they're like, you know what? We should probably talk to our young Johnny, or we should probably talk to our young Emily about this. This is pretty urgent stuff, especially with young people being online, especially with young teenage boys watching countless hours of pornography. Like, we need to address this situation, and it's up to us adults to do that.
Are you addressing it in a way where you're having, like, you suggesting parents talk to their children about what inappropriate behavior looks like, or what are some of those things that people can look at?
I try my best not to instruct the audiences that I speak to do anything specifically, because who am I really? I'm not an expert that's written books. I'm not anybody that's written papers. I'm not anybody that's conducted research. So I try my hardest not to instruct the audience to what I think they should do. What instead I try to do is I explain what I would have needed. What information did I need as a child to identify what I was involved in was wrong and that I need to tell somebody immediately? What kind of support or conversations or education did I need as a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old? Or what videos did I need to see as a 21-year-old that would have helped me face what had happened earlier and handle it in the correct way? And that's how I lead the conversation, because actually I'm not there to answer questions. I'm there to provoke the questions, and get people thinking in their own head. I want to leave people from my presentation. I want them thinking, wow, I've never thought about it like that before. Because the usual safeguarding training that teachers are going through and other people that are in care of young people, this is a good example. It's all about spotting the signs, the common signs of abuse, that a child is going through abuse. So the safeguarding training, which I completely support, I think it's brilliant that that's happening Teachers go through it every year. So it focuses on these common signs, the 7 signs of abuse, etc. Where my story was completely different. I was showing no signs. I was doing well in class, had lots of friends, outspoken, and I've even spoken to the parents that knew me when I was 8 years old and still know me today, because I've got some friends that I've been friends with since those days. And I even say to them, now you look back at 8-year-old Jeremy, could you see that I was showing any signs? And they're all like, no, you weren't giving us any indication what was going on. So I want to go and make people really think about this, because, you know, the grooming process is so sophisticated and it's so controlling, and some children don't show any signs. So I want to kind of I think if we can all lay a piece of the puzzle down, especially using our own stories, then we can just try to form a bit more of a rounded picture. And that's what the children are relying on us to do.
Mm. Yeah, it's also like so challenging, because a lot of these situations, the child sees the adult as someone that cares for them, that they love potentially. And you're not going to like outwardly show signs of that when you go to school. You're going to feel loved and cared for because you're not really sure what's happening. Right. Physical abuse is totally different. You're going to have bruises everywhere. You're going to show signs. You're going to be tired, things like that. But for a child to feel like they're loved and cared for, especially like in your situation, your parents were going through divorce, right? Yeah. You had someone who was there for you, quote unquote, yeah. Right? So what signs are you going to show? You feel like, oh, okay, this is how it is, like, you know. And so that part is interesting to me. It always feels like the weight is so solely put on the child to like show these signs that he or she is getting like sexually abused over and over and over again. Like that's all the weight on my shoulder. So there has to be a different way. I know it's very complicated and we don't live in these households and we don't have cameras and we can't see all of these things happening, but there's got to be a different way to saying like that. Yes. At least in my opinion.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's very interesting when you say we're putting all the weight on children's shoulders, and we really are. And I had a podcast, a guest on my podcast who's the director of a charity called Stop It Now here in England. I think they've been rebranded to Lucy Faithfull Foundation now. And they actually work with offenders, young offenders. And they're trying to get young people to come forward if they've got dangerous thoughts towards children before they actually commit the crime. And something that was so powerful that this gentleman said to me, he was like, how dare we put all the responsibility on these children's shoulders to identify if they're being sexually abused and for them to come and speak to us? That's not the root of the problem. Because once they've had to come and tell us about an abusive situation that they're in, the abuse is already happening. Mm-hmm. So actually we're late. So why are we not working before all of those stages happening? Having an open conversation about anyone that's got dangerous thoughts in their head that wants to come forward, because that way you could save a child. But every time that I try to open that conversation on my platforms, I get incredible kickback, a lot of hateful comments, because nobody wants to give any time to the offenders. But we're all very happy to continue educating these children about the dangers they may face, which I believe is a necessary ingredient to this. But we don't want to look at the other side because it's too uncomfortable for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too uncomfortable to admit that people actually have thoughts about, right, you know, being sexual with children. Like that makes them excited. Yes. And we can't think about that because those people are too far gone. They're psychopaths. They're crazy. They're not like me. Right. But you have to be able to see the human in someone else to be able to help them. Obviously it's not right, quote unquote, but it is something that can be caught early and maybe helped, or, you know, whatever, any sort of psychological thing that's happening sort of can be worked through in a way that potentially could help them from not abusing that child, or, you know, getting the help they need. So that's the proactive measure, right? That's like going at it way before the crisis hits so that we can, you know, save people. That's the same thing I talk about with mental health. Or are you waiting till the moment you want to potentially, you know, end your life, or the darkness consumes you? Let's get ahead of it with some of these proactive measures, with eating well, with moving well, with sleeping well, with relationships, with, you know, whatever the case may be is. And so now, again, can't save everyone. It's not going to happen. It's not possible. We're not God. like someone is controlling, whatever the case may be, whatever you believe, but we can do a better job than we're doing now. That's 100% sure.
100%. We can do a better job than we are doing now is the phrase to move forward with, because we're not doing that good a job at the moment. And, I'm under no illusion that many of these people that are committing crimes against children are psychopaths, and you're never going to stop them. And I'm not talking about some magical cure, like somebody that's got sexual thoughts towards a child goes into a therapy session and they haven't got those sexual thoughts towards a child anymore. You know what I mean? I'm under no illusion about any of that. But we need to be proactive, because there are going to be a certain percentage of these people that have got these sexual thoughts that would come forward and that would seek some kind of professional to work with them to just maximize the chances that they never give in to the temptation. Now, this Lucy Faithfull Foundation, they launched an anonymous phone line here in the UK, and that was to encouraging men, in particular young men, to come forward if they need to talk through what they've got in their head. And they received 7,000 calls from men in their first year.
Whoa.
And that 7,000 men, you got to think about how many didn't make the call, that thought about making the call. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. And, anybody that's listening to this, many will be angry of even the suggestion, and for anybody that is come with the immediate reaction of thinking, just shoot them, just castrate them, just lock them up and throw away the key. I'm like, okay, that's fine. As a solution, that's fine. But that is the solution that can only happen when the crime has been committed.
Right.
So my question is, where were all the adults when that man was sexually abusing me when I was a child? Where were all the adults then? Where are all the systems and processes? Where was all the conversation then? Because that happened back in 1993, and I'm pretty sure that none of that was happening. And, it's probably sure that I wasn't the first child that you ever touched, and probably not the last child either. So to put that into perspective, we really need to start thinking about this logically. And I was a design engineer before I did all of this work. I used to design aircraft and supercars. So as an engineer, my brain is trained. That was a 15-year career. So my brain is trained to try to find the weak spots in a system. Why is the output not working correctly? So where are the weak spots? And I believe one of the weak spots is this conversation about offenders.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I get the aversion to it. I get the pushback to it, to not even wanting to give someone the light of day who has these, awful thoughts about wanting to be sexual with children, and that makes them excited. I understand. Like, even saying that out loud makes me a bit.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And I get it. But if we just totally ignore that full-fledged, like you said, like, we're only catching people once they've done the horrible act. But if we can, before, like, so it has to be done. It has to be done. And I'm glad you chosen to take it up. Because I don't know if I would be the man for the job, but we're like 30 minutes into this episode, and we haven't really discussed your actual story, so I feel like that's important. We just got rolling a little bit, and I didn't really want to stop the train. But how did you get to this spot where you're in right now? I mean, you don't have to go through the whole deal. People can go on your YouTube channel for more in-depth story. But just to give us a little bit of backstory.
So the sexual abuse that was going on in my childhood was when I was 8 years old. It went on for 2 years. I never told anybody what was going on. I look back at myself at that age now, and I didn't really identify anything was alarming or wrong. I knew that it needed to be kept a secret, and that it was something that only me and him done, and we didn't do it with anyone else, and we weren't to tell anyone else about it. Now, this man, he was 35 years old. My parents had recently separated, so he was a mate of my dad's. He was a friend of my dad's, work colleague, actually. My dad was a doctor, he was a nurse, and he needed help with accommodation, so he would stay around now and again. And this is when it all started. And I know it's really confusing for people to think about, well, why didn't you just tell somebody about it? And the sexual abuse was not painful or aggressive or forceful with me. Some people do go through that type of abuse, but for me, it wasn't like that. It was very coercive. It was very gentle. There was a lot of fondling. There was a lot of molestation. And when the fondling was happening to my body, I've got so many nerve endings everywhere. It was giving me some kind of comforting response. It was giving me some kind of caring response. I'm pretty sure he would have told me verbally that, this is something that we're cool because we're doing it together. He must have framed it in a way that didn't seem like a danger to me. Now, that I remember, there were certain things that would make me feel uncomfortable. In particular, when he would ask me to repeat what he'd just done to me back to him, there was something in my instinct that was telling me that this doesn't feel right. But at 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, you don't have the maturity to do anything with that. You don't have the development to actually put a mature spin on that and be like, this is making me feel uncomfortable. I wonder why. You're just going along with life. Life is what is being created for you in your environment. So I never spoke out about it at all. Nobody had a clue about it whatsoever.
Wow. And then as you got older, did it impact your relationships with partners you had or things like that?
I just turned into a very determined and successful young man who felt very confident within himself, believed that he could achieve whatever he wanted to, which led me to become very successful in class, but also very bolshy out of class too. I had this great set of mates. We were so mischievous, causing trouble here and there, just having a good laugh like young lads. I was playing sport. I was quite aggressive. I felt very confident physically as well. So, with the other boys in the school, I wasn't scared. And it was just felt like I could take on the world. And I don't know whether that's because maybe subconsciously, I'd need someone professional to help me with this analysis. But, did I go through something that is so horrific as a child and come out the other side of it? And something was like, well, you can do whatever you want now. Like you can achieve whatever you desire. Who knows? Right? Who knows? I had some good role models too. My dad's work ethic was a good role model. I had some great teachers who believed in me along the way. I followed sports stars that were very inspiring. But I just turned into this young man who felt like he could achieve whatever he wanted. And I took that attitude into my career. I got a modern apprenticeship at 18 years old and landed at a phenomenal company in the aerospace industry. They invested so much into their young people, and they trained me to be a designer of aircraft systems, structures, parts. It just completely captured me. It was so technical. It kept me so focused. And I just continued my life along that path. Now, in my personal life, great friends. Some of the friends I met, like in my primary school days, which is like when I moved to my new school when I was 7 and 8 years old. Some of them I still am friends with today, so 30 years later. When it comes to relationships, that's the thing that everybody wants to hear about. Like, did it affect your trust issues? Did it affect your relationships? And I often think, to take that apart would be so complicated. Now, one thing that we could come to a conclusion on is the fact that I didn't get into my first serious relationship until I was in my mid-30s, right? So until I was 34. Now, lots of people and myself could come to a conclusion that actually what happened was I was emotionally and sexually exploited as a child, and that put some barriers up. That put a defense mechanism up. I'm not going there again. It's vulnerable there. I don't want to go there. I got hurt last time. I got exploited and manipulated into something disgusting last time. I don't want to give myself to anyone else in that way. That could be an idea. But also, my parents' divorce could have put me off relationships and seeing the hurt that was suffered there. Possible. Seeing my mates get cheated on and how much that hurt them could have put me off too. But also, I was so career driven. Maybe I was like, I don't want to compromise with anyone, right? I'm on this pathway and I don't need anyone else like getting in the way of that. That could have been an idea too. So like it's so complicated. Who knows? So I was just having fun in my 20s, friends with benefit type arrangements, just having a good laugh with my mates. But I do think that some of the effects of the sexual abuse that I'm pretty sure are a direct result is in my mid 20s when I started speaking about this out loud, I started wondering if I was gay. And that was such a dark time because I was like, have I been trying to kid myself all of this time? Like getting with all these girls, or was I trying to hide something? Did he plant a seed in my childhood? Would I have already been, was I that way inclined, but then he just evolved it? Or has he changed me? Am I gay? It was this horrible confusion. And I've written a little bit about it on my social media accounts. And every time I put a post out about this, I've had countless men come to me saying the same thing. Because what that man has done is come to my life, prepubescent stage of my life, where there's no sexual nature in my body at all. And he's come and he's played around with a load of stuff. You know, he's opened that section of my brain that puberty naturally would have opened, but he's come in and he's opened it early. So who knows what mess he would have created there. Now I went on to my life, meeting my wife now in my mid 30s, and I feel at peace with all of those questions that I didn't feel at peace with at the time. But that horrible stage of when I was speaking out loud, very confused in what effects that would have made to me in my personality, was a pretty dark time and very common for other people that have been through something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense for a very young boy who is, you know, being manipulated and coerced and abused by someone that he potentially looks up to or cares for, a coach, whatever the case may be, and he, again, quote unquote, enjoys what's happening. And then he starts to come to the realization later in life when he starts to figure these things out. Like that's a very straight line. That's a very straight path to that conclusion. Like, oh, if I enjoyed it then,
Right.
it must be now that this is who I am. And, you know, so those are some of the hard things that you have to come to work through as obviously as you did, as you're starting to, you know, figure this out. But one thing that I thought about when you're talking was like, was your career driven path a sort of a byproduct of, if you become so successful and so career driven and so confident that you never ever no one will ever assume that you got abused as a child? That can't be Jeremy. He's too successful and kind and he's well spoken and he's an engineer, and like that would never even cross my mind that might happen to him. So that could also, I don't know, this popped into my brain. That could be another thing that might happen.
I mean, it's super interesting, isn't it? It's super
Yeah.
interesting, you know. Or was it me? Somebody said to me on a podcast that I'd just been on, called Ellen McChrystal. She's a therapist here in England. She's got quite a big podcast, and she said to me, "I believe that your striving of excellence in your career was you taking your power back and proving to yourself that you can overcome anything, including what you went through in your childhood." But I also think when you look at the journey of this life, I think at the very least, the huge benefit to come from becoming a very skillful engineer, understanding how to hold a project, understanding how to brainstorm ideas, how to evolve certain parts of a system. All of that work that I did in that engineering career, which I've now left to pursue this, that will help me to do what I do now. Like, I just went onto your website and we have similar setups. We've got the merchandise, we've got the podcast, we've got the speaking events, we've got an online presence. And, you know, to handle all of that, that's not an easy task.
Mm-mm.
That's not an easy task. That's project management. That's project management, and knowing what needs attention now, what's weak, what needs stronger. So at the very least, that excelling in my engineering career has given me the tools and the knowledge to embark on this new mission.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same about how my sports background like led me to this. Like podcasting, for instance, like people get into podcasting like, okay, 20 episodes in, I'm gonna be Joe Rogan. It's gonna be fucking sick. I'm gonna get the $200 million deal. And I'm like, dude, that's crazy. It's like I played baseball from like age 14 to like age 4, age 4 to 22. And I feel like I got good like after like 16 years. And so I took the same thing into podcasting. This is episode like 230 something. And like I still feel like I'm not very good. I'm okay. I've gotten better, right? But what about episode 400, 500, 600? So like the same thing with speaking. Like, yeah, I'll get 100 no's, but then I'll get a yes, and you just keep chugging away. Like it's all about reps and sets. Like, and you're thinking about doing this thing or creating content or public speaking or sharing your story. Like, yeah, the first couple times might be brutal, but there's still the first couple times, and that's awesome. And you just get your reps and sets in. Like I imagine the first time you gave a presentation about your story, like it was probably awesome, but it wasn't as good as it is what you just did for the football team a couple of days ago. Like you probably just smoked that and you came out of the room like, yeah, that was good.
Yeah, and you're so right, and I'm continuously learning, trying to push the boundaries. Even when I finished at the football club, I still went away and I was like, okay, that bit seemed a bit slow. That person made a comment about that bit because they didn't understand, so maybe it's not clear enough. Maybe if I move that bit at the start to the end, it's going to give a better summary. Like I'm continually learning, and there is no limit here in how good we can get with communicating these topics. Both mine and your topics, it's to try to get people to understand the complexity, the depth, the seriousness of it, and how are we going to do that? How are we going to get these subjects on people's table that have never had any involvement in it before, whether that be their personal life or a friend or a family member? Because we can speak to the people who have been through it before. We can speak to them all day, but we're also trying to get to the mothers and the fathers and the brothers and the sisters that have never thought about it before. Give them some awareness so that if it does ever prop up in their own life or their family or their friendship group, they're going to be more equipped to deal with that situation.
Yeah, that's the power right there. Let's take a little turn here to pornography in the same sphere, obviously. How do you look at like a 13-year-old boy, stumbling upon very hardcore pornography? How is that impacting his life? Yeah, a lot of questions from that, but we'll see where we go.
I'm more and more finding this a important topic to talk about, because we all know that young teenagers are watching pornography. We all, as men, me and yourself, know what it was like when puberty entered our lives and how crazy the hormones are. And I'm 38, so there was no online pornography on a mobile phone when I was 13, but thank goodness there wasn't, because I would have been on it 24/7. Literally, my hormones were racing. And I'm just wondering, when you are on these pornography websites, and just to be clear here, I'm not talking about adults watching pornography, right? When we talk about adults pornography, that is a different conversation. I'm trying to open the conversation on underdeveloped brains watching hours of pornography and what that is doing as the algorithm pulls them down different rabbit holes. And you're on there for an hour, and all of a sudden you're watching something that you thought was gross before you started watching it, or something that was well extreme. And as soon as you finish masturbating, you turn that laptop off and shut that laptop as soon as you can and push it away. If you're a 13-year-old going down those rabbit holes, by the time you're 16, in this country, age of consent is 16, you've been watching pornography for 3 years and you've never even kissed a girl before. And what's that done to your brain? And most pornography is hardcore pornography, aggressive pornography, dominating pornography, and also a lot of it is where it's all about the man's pleasure and the girl is used to serve that. So what kind of narrative are we giving to these young people? And it's so weird, isn't it? Because everything else has an age restriction on it. Alcohol, cigarettes, driving, even certain films have an age restriction on them. Films have an 18 age restriction on them because they've got one scene of somebody getting undressed to have sex,
There's one nipple.
straight 18 certification, you're not allowed to watch it. But then
Yeah.
you've got all of this hardcore pornography online that anyone's allowed to watch. And I want to continue learning about that and the effects of it. Now, Emily Setti, who you've had on your podcast, has great approaches to these things. And by the way, I would encourage anyone that's listening to this to go and check out your conversation with Emily Setti, because I've actually done some workshops with her with young teenage boys, and she holds their attention so well. She's so unique with what she does. And she's like, yeah, okay, we are going to be waiting for a long time for the government to put regulations on this, yeah? Because you've got to fight, because the pornography websites don't want a regulation on their sites because they're going to lose views, lose advertising money. I reckon a large percentage of their views comes from young teenagers. So she's like, instead of us trying to constantly go on about how there should be an 18 certificate on there, which I think we all agree there should be, let's just talk to these young people on a level about what they're watching, right? For them to be aware of what rabbit holes they're going down. But nobody wants to talk to young people about what they're watching on their porn sites. Parents were never going to do that. I think fathers would feel weird doing that because they're watching it themselves. And so it's like a very weird situation that we're in. But I think, is a big prediction from me, I bet you it's going to end up the same as something like the journey that smoking went on. Because if you think about smoking, like back in the day when it first came out, there were adverts on TV talking about how the great lifestyle smoking can bring you.
Everyone was hacking darts, dude. Everyone.
Yeah. And then you had it where I remember when I was a young child, you used to have advertising on Formula One cars, which was smoking. Then I remember my dad used to go to the back of the aeroplane when we used to go and visit Sri Lanka, where my parents are from, and have a cigarette because there used to be a smoking area at the back. Then I remember like when you used to go into a restaurant, there was smoking on the left and non-smoking on the right. The place must have stunk of smoke. Then I remember having a cigarette like on the dance floor. Like, that is wild. And like our children, for anybody that has got children, are going to look back at those times and be like, what were you lot playing at?
Yeah.
Like, that is so stupid. And I feel like there's going to be the same narrative around pornography in the decades to come.
I mean, I hope so, man, because it's really bad right now. It's really bad. Just the sheer volume and easy access to all of these things on the internet is you already see the downstream effects. Like I think a lot about modern dating, and you already see the downstream effects of young men. Like, young men are less active in society. They're not getting their driver's licenses early. They're not having sex as often. And you hear that like, okay, who cares? They're not having sex as often. But what that simply means is that they're not going out into the world and approaching women in real time. Like, they're not having conversations. They're not creating relationships. They're not learning how to get rejected by women over and over and over again. They're not learning how to talk or be more confident. They're just like, oh, just go home and I'll masturbate to these thousands of beautiful women on my phone.
Yeah.
And it's super easy. And then I can go into a virtual world, and then I can work from home, and then I can get my food delivered to my house, and I can get alcohol delivered to my house. And like, maybe if I want to work out, I can do it at my house, but like everything can be done in this like small area. And so you already see the downstream effects of that. And already in the modern dating market, men and women are already very divisive. Like, it's so adversarial right now, because if women elevate, men have to push them down. If women are elevated, they have to push them down. Like, it can't be an elevation of together. So we're just creating higher standards for our partnerships and our relationships. And so if young boys at 13, 14, 15 are watching, women just get dominated by these dudes on the pornography, again, that's how they're going to think that if they ever encounter a real woman in real time, that's how they think they should approach it. And this woman should be like easy, submissive, like just fall at my feet. No, you have to have effort, just like everything we're talking about. You have to be an eligible person. You have to carry yourself with confidence and grace and kindness and respect for the opposite sex to create relationships that last forever. Because the good life, no matter how you spin it, is built on two things: good health and good relationships. It's very simple. It's like not hard. We make life way too complicated. Like take care of yourself and take care of your relationships. I think it's very
Amazing.
simple. And so that's not going to be taught on a phone watching, a gangbang or a dominatrix or whatever the fuck you're watching. And no shame for watching that stuff. Like maybe you have to explore all of those things. But like you're talking about with the cigarettes, the thing that's happening now that's super cool is all of these podcasts, these strong, powerful men and women are talking about this on podcasts, like in real time. Like, this is what's going to happen if you do this. I watched pornography for 10 years. This is what happened to me. This is how my brain felt. This is where I got left off. This is how I didn't achieve this thing. Like, if you can take control and have intentionality over the things that you do, it's just like scrolling on Twitter. If you have, or Instagram, if you have a little bit of intentionality with I'm going on Twitter or Instagram to find this thing, to read this news story, to do this thing, and I'm giving myself a time restriction. After 15 minutes, I'm done. Now, that's a better approach to pornography than just saying, I'm going to get on here and I'm going to see what pops up. Like, you don't know what the fuck is going to pop up, And so there can be little tiny steps that you can take to create a little more intentionality with how you view your sexuality and how you view yourself. Because then once you get into a powerful relationship, you're going to have to express what you need and what you want and what you like and what you don't like. And if all you've seen is on the internet, you don't really know. You don't really know. You haven't had the consensual relationships to explore those types of things.
You summarized it so well. And hopefully, these young boys, which, there's going to be countless of them. I'm hoping that, like, as you mentioned, more and more people are talking about this subject. They just become more aware of what they're watching, because the danger is that out of all of those young boys that are watching this and going down these rabbit holes, which we agree is dangerous, you're going to get that 1% that actually go, and it takes them down a road that they would have never have gone down before. And I'm talking about now offending, right?
Mm-hmm.
About taking that very dominating, aggressive sexual behavior that they've been watching for years and actually applying it in real life. And, I haven't seen any research, but a question is, if you could go through sex offenders' pornography history, I wonder if you'd start seeing some correlation there.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like it tracks well. Yeah,
And people talk about it being very similar to a drug or something that gives you dopamine. Right, so you go on there, you get that incredible response. It's a sexual response, right? It's like one of our primary ones. And then the next time you go on there, you chase that next thrill and that next thrill and that next thrill, and it's never ending until you want it in the real thing. I know we're talking about extreme circumstances here, but we need to talk about those extreme circumstances.
Yeah, because those are the ones that we could potentially,
Right.
prevent from happening, right? All of the normal stuff in the middle, people going through these normal ups and downs and stumbling upon these things, and your buddy sent out a link and you click on the link, and like those things are just going to happen. Like
Yeah.
you can't prevent that. Everyone has a cell phone.
Yeah.
But I think also what's important when talking about young boys is that there's also a movement that that boys should like stop masturbating for good. And like I also don't think that's like an extreme to an extreme. Like there should be some sexual exploration within yourself, like because you have to find out what is good for you, what you like, what you don't like. But that's hard to put like a cap on, right? Because that person is usually in their room alone, like trying to figure some stuff out. But if they've seen the information about people that they look up to on social media, like talking about these things in a real way, like how they did it, how they explored it, what they're doing, then maybe they can figure that out on their own. Because this is not going to be talked about with your buddies, not yet, not at such a young age.
No.
Like it's not until they get into maybe adulthood, potentially, that they start having these conversations, and maybe not even then, because there's still a lot of shame that's involved with men being sexual beings and exploring that idea of who they are and who they want to be. So I think that's also an important point when you throw that in the mix. But again, those are extremes. But like you said, extremes have to be talked about, because then when people get to those extremes, they don't want to feel like they're a crazy person or a psycho for they've heard at least one person say something about this all of the time. And so they're like, okay, there's a way out. I can figure this out. There's something for me to do about it. And I think that's valuable information.
I agree completely.
there was one stat on your website that really popped out to me that I want to just discuss before I let you go, and it's that sexually abused children are 4 times more likely to kill themselves as adults. Obviously, it stood out to me as someone who's in the mental health suicide prevention space. Why do you think that is?
I believe that there's a horror and a shame and an embarrassment, and for some, a guilt that what happened to them is something that they can't overcome, or something that spirals them out of control, in particular when they become adults. And my explanation is being influenced by my own personal experience. When they become adults, looking back at the child that they were, they feel so sorry for that child, that they got trapped into that situation. And it's something that they don't see a way out of. And that statistic of an adult is 4 times more likely to take their own life is so horrific, and I feel so sad for people that would be considering that following a sexual abuse situation. And that is one of the big reasons why I want to inject some hope, strength, and courage into this conversation, because enough is enough now. I don't want people feeling tremendously sad, like their life can't evolve forward, and not being able to find anyone else talking about that, and they're only seeing sadness and sorrow, and there's no recovery. There's no one saying, showing them that, look, this is my story, this is what I went through, and this is how I overcome it. This is some of the techniques that I used. Was my process. These were my downs, these were my ups. And that is why I do believe that the Something to Say YouTube channel that we launched, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago, we've got 7 videos on there. It's just so powerful to see people share their story in video format, because the big one is people just feel less alone. People that are alone in their house on the internet every night, or not with many friends, they don't feel alone because there's a community out there that are talking about it, like, you're going to be able to get through this. But I haven't seen, alongside the statistic you just mentioned, I haven't seen a statistic about the percentage or the increase in chances of a child taking their own life following sexual abuse in their childhood. And I have had somebody on that YouTube channel called Nancy, who is a parent of a daughter that took her own life at 14 years old following sexual abuse. How is Nancy and her husband going to get over that? Never. And let's not make it about the parents. So I apologize. I shouldn't have directed the attention that way straight away. Let's think about the young girl. There was no out for her. There was nowhere she could find to persuade her or influence her to not doing that. And I'm not an expert on people taking their own lives. I've never done any research into that. So if for anybody that has had thoughts of that nature and you feel like that was an incorrect analysis of from me, I apologize. But it's like, this is so tragic. This is so tragic. Thank goodness we have this podcast space and the YouTube channels and the social media accounts that people like me and you can have the opportunity to dedicate our lives to trying to reach these people.
Yeah, the young person who ends their life, it's like there's not a lot of words that can capture how awful it is. And a lot of people are like, well, were there signs? Were there this? Were there that? Generally speaking, very, very generally speaking, I'm not going to speak specifically to people's stories, but generally speaking, like, young people end their own life based on 1 or 2 very horrific instances, because they don't have the capacity to think longer term. They don't have the perspective to think this could get better. And so it's not so much like a mental illness. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. Like, they're talking about bullying. We're talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about these horrible things that happened to this young person that they feel like they cannot come back from. And they don't have the life experience to tell them that they can. And so that makes sense. Like, it's horrible, but we can see a young person's brain how that would make sense for them. And so what's important is the conversations we have that they hear every single day about this stuff, that gives them the courage to say, oh no, I can move forward one more day. I can tell someone about this. Because, outwardly, we don't know what messages they're receiving on their phone. We don't know what's happening inside their home. All of this stuff is so hard to tell that the only way to potentially combat it is to be so proactive about the conversations you have about bullying, how to talk to people, online sexual behavior, the things that Dr. Emily Setti is doing, right? This conversation, like sexual abuse at home, like talking about it so frequently, and getting people to move their bodies and talk to their friends so they can feel themselves just move around and get better and have these conversations and all these things, so that when the thing does happen, when they get bullied, like the sexual abuse is a little bit different, like than the bullying maybe happening in school. It's a little harder to track, but then they feel like, okay, I can overcome this situation. I have the tools. We've talked about it before. Maybe I can go to my parents. There has to be those things there. And so, not to say it's a perfect solution. Of course not. Nothing's perfect. Nothing will ever be perfect. But it can be better than it is now.
Right.
Like, it can be better than it is now. And yeah, I mean, I know what Nancy's parents are feeling. I've watched my parents, go through it. I mean,
Right.
my sister didn't die at 14. She died 6 years ago when she was an adult. But you never get over that. That's not something you get over. You don't move on from it. You try your hardest to move forward with it. And if there's more parents sharing stories about how they're still finding joy and happiness, then more parents will feel like they can do it too. And I have a lot of love for my parents, so much love that it's like, I can't even express it. And to see them, still decide to move forward with their life and stay together and enjoy their life as best as they possibly can, is the role models that we all need in our life. And so, not to go on a tangent there about my parents,
amazing. I thought that was so powerful. Amazing.
So, Jeremy, thank you, man. I enjoyed meeting you, having this conversation with you. Hopefully we can have more. So thank you.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Where should people go if they want more of you?
If you want to find out more about my work and follow this journey as I try to get this subject on everybody's table, you can search Jeremy Indika on all social media platforms, and the organisation that I founded is Something to Say Official on all platforms. Go check it out.
All linked in the show notes below. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode, please click here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But above all else, most importantly, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.